Thank you so much for being here today, everyone. We are so excited. I have Raja and Matt Whaley today with me from Triple 13. I am the newest in this group to Freestar. And when starting a few months back, Freestar had just acquired Triple 13, led by these two guys. And we wanted today to just get in front of all enterprise publishers to talk about the benefits, any sort of misinformation that might be in your mind, hoping we're to clear that up. AMP is an excellent way to both monetize your mobile web pages as well as adhere with Google guidelines. So we're going to kick it off. This is called Amplify Your Mobile Experience, and I will give it to Raja.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for, first of all, attending this workshop. I really wanted to go through some of this this information with you and really dive into getting into the AMP and its benefits. So we've got an agenda to go through, and I just want to take you through it. So we want to cover off what is AMP and its benefits. We've got some limitations of AMP as well, because there are a few which are important to also consider. And my favorite part of this will be the limitations and also the exposing of the 5 big AMP myths, which we'll cover off in detail. And then we'll move on to some ingredients for success and what that looks like for your websites and jump into that. And then towards the end, we'll have some areas for you to ask some questions, and then we can jump into answering that as quick as possible. Cool. So throughout this, if you have any questions, just post it in the questions box and we'll get it picked up and we'll address it as quick as possible. All right, so let's jump into this, right? So there are 3 big main things that are, I would say, the core benefits of using AMP. And one of them is speed, Web Core Vitals, which is built into AMP itself, and the page experience metrics. I'm going to explain these in detail in the next few slides. And let's cover this off with speed. So when your mobile web page, when it loads fastest, you automatically improve the user experience and your KPIs owing to the instant loading of the AMP pages. You're able to offer a consistently fast web experience across all of your devices, and that's very important. The median time loaded for AMP is actually really, really quick. It's less than 1 second, which implies that when a user lands on an AMP page, they get exactly what they're looking for straight away without having to wait for anything to buffer or anything to load. Now, conversions is very important as well, especially if you've got websites such as e-commerce. It's very important. So conversions can actually drop by 12% for every additional second that it takes a website to load. And that's huge, because this means that if you want to engage with the audience and boost your return on investment, you need to guarantee that your mobile website meets their speed expectations. The people who are visiting, it has to meet their speed expectations. So those are very important. With Web Core Vitals becoming a very, very important part of Google's algorithm, Google considers this as one of its main things as part of speed and mobile responsiveness. The better the user experience, the longer they stay on the page, which ultimately results in longer page sessions, which also reduces bounce rates as well. Those are very...
Sorry, Raja, sorry to interrupt. We have a quick question really quick, and I think everyone would want to know. So does GA4 support AMP pages? Coming in from the audience.
Sorry, this is Lindsay. I can jump in. I was actually writing back to you. Great question. Raja, do you want to take it? It does in the same way.
Yeah, I think they're still building out GA4 because we got a bit of time until they completely turn all the taps off for that, but it does support it.
Yeah, in the same way, almost always the way that AMP in GA looks is with the /AMP at the end to specify that URL. So I don't know if that may change, because that's not the only way that the AMP URL can appear in GA. They may even break it out further in a more advanced way for GA4, but it will be able to track it, yes. I think you're on mute.
All these direct and indirect factors are valuable. They're extremely valuable for Google, because that's exactly what it's looking for. It's looking for people to stay engaged and be receptive to the content itself. But the thing is, you don't need AMP to benefit from these things. However, it is built in within AMP. It's kind of like an automatic thing that you get as a benefit as part of AMP itself. Now, one thing to consider is this chart, right? Because it's a very clear indication of what Google is really looking for. So Google defines page experience as a set of signals that measures how users perceive the experience of interacting with a web page beyond its pure information value. So this is not just the content itself, but exactly how they interact with it and how it works. So AMP has these factors as standard, which in turn are automatically meeting these standards for page experience. So that gives you that boost itself without having to do it yourself. Now, there are some drawbacks of AMP. And it depends really, it depends on how you have things set up and what you want to really consider. So one of those things is you've got to manage 2 code stacks. So if your website, you've got an AMP version, and then you've got also a desktop version as well. Those are 2 things that you do have to actually manage. So that can be a drawback. AMP is also quite restrictive in its framework. Not so much for WordPress, because you can automatically use a plugin that is easy to convert AMP pages into AMP pages with WordPress, but that is one of the limitations. And we're going to go into these drawbacks in a bit more detail as well. And one of those is obviously analytics is a little bit more stripped down compared to what we normally have, which we just discussed. So managing 2 code stacks. For publishers that has resources and want to simplify their code stack, it's much easier to build out one fast, efficient mobile web experience that on mobile as well as desktop can benefit from. Without having said, also you don't have to manage AMP on top of another CMS as well. So that's also one of the drawbacks. Now, this will give you great flexibility and control, but with that comes at a cost, and that's the resources that's needed to maintain it. Because essentially what you're doing is you're having to commit those resources to building it and maintaining it and keeping it up to date. That's why it's a bit restrictive. With a framework, there are things which also you kind of lose as part of using AMP. So email pop-ups, opt-in forms, sidebar widgets, anything that is strategically placed like social share buttons, and more like they don't appear on AMP as you normally would. So you might potentially lose out on subscribers and leads as a result of those limitations. One of the benefits, you might also lose these benefits depending on what strategies you want to implement on your pages as well. So you don't have that freedom, so to speak. With analytics, one of the most things to understand is that your AMP page is not identical to an original page. They are quite separate, and they're different in the way that they're set up. Because AMP supports Google Analytics through various tags, it takes significant amount of time and effort for these tags to be put into place and collect the data and analyze it. It takes a bit more time, so more resources is needed. So special resources and efforts are required for tracking, which may take time and not immediately available is the main thing. That's why the analytics is a bit more stripped down. That might change, we don't know, but at the moment this is where we're at. So let's jump into some myth busting, which is one of my favorite areas. I love this bit. So number 1 myth, isn't AMP owned by Google? Well, traditionally, it was an open sourced HTML framework that was developed within collaboration with Google itself, but it is open format, so it's not like someone actually owns it by itself. It was originally created by Google as a competitor to Facebook for their instant articles and Apple News as well. So that's one of the reasons why it was created. AMP is also optimized for web browsing and intended to help web publishers load articles faster on mobile as well as desktop. So it's not really owned by Google, so to speak. It has a lot of involvement from some of those engineers as well, but it's not owned by Google. This is quite interesting, actually. Like, one of the biggest things that I've seen is that how much there's an adoption of AMP. So AMP has been created in conjunction with thousands of developers and publishers, websites, distributors, etc. But it's got more than 1.5 billion AMP pages that's been created today, and the AMP format itself has about 100 prominent analytics, ad techs, and CMS suppliers all combined. So it's got a breadth of diffusion in the CMS, and a lot of people do take up on it. So it just shows that there is significant backing behind AMP still. Google's going to kill off AMP. Well, technically, it's not really theirs to kill off in the first place, because it's an open source framework that anyone can use. I would say though that they might have removed the prioritization, which they've already kind of completed, and they've started to do this by removing certain things in search, like removing the AMP label and various other metrics that's required before you needed to have AMP in order to get into stories and things like that. So that's no longer a requirement, but Google is not killing off AMP anytime soon. Now, one of the announcements that was quite interesting as well to consider is what they said as an announcement as part of this. So Google has said, as part of this update, we'll also incorporate the page experience metrics into the ranking criteria for top stories features in search on mobile. And they'll remove the AMP requirement for the top eligibility stories. However, AMP itself, they will continue to use AMP. They will continue to link to it where available. So they might have removed the eligibility, but what they've done is they made it open to everyone, and the requirement for that is to have a really good page experience. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah, I love that part. The idea, just to reiterate, that Google has stopped favoring it in the search results, those AMP pages that they were favoring are still appearing in the search results. We've clicked around, and I've done a lot of this on my own as well. On like the SEO side, I've considering it from another angle when I speak to publishers with it, but and removing the little logo, that's fine, but still the majority of pages appearing in those carousels, in those cards, in those special mobile placements at the top of pages are either running AMP or are as fast as AMP, like in that 1 second range. So whatever solves for that will continue to support those placements.
Itself just indicates what they're really looking for, because they're moving the goalposts, so to speak, in terms of what they're actually looking for. Right, so this one, I love this one. Advertising revenues are lower on AMP than mobile web. So as you know, we've worked with a lot of publishers and we have access to the data, first party data, and we optimize it. That's kind of what we do. So it's interesting to see this. So to give you an example, here's one of our publishers, which is a popular tech review website. We can't disclose the name for obvious reasons, but let's just have a look at their impressions, okay? So web impressions, they had about 169 million, AMP impressions, they had about 278 million. So the comparison between the two, the difference is like 108 million more impressions in comparison where AMP is compared to web. So it just shows that that has a large amount of diffusion throughout the websites and rankings, etc., in terms of how much traffic and how much impressions they actually get.
Raj, can I add one thing here too? Sorry. Yeah. When you're speaking in general AMP impressions, that people tend to think of AMP to Google, that's all, organic search, but that is not all that will drive those impressions. For example, if you're a news site and getting a lot of traffic from Flipboard, I know for a fact uses all AMP versions if they're running it, and they're much more likely to send traffic to a publisher, this is Flipboard again, who's running AMP. Same with, I want to say Newsbreak or Smart News, one of the others. So these are impressions even outside, obviously, of Google search, which is great.
All of that will add towards it, because there's a lot of aggregate sites that actually do that.
Yeah.
On pulling the data. So let's consider what kind of the differences in terms of revenue, because that's quite interesting as well. So one thing that we saw, we saw that there was a 48% increase in impressions compared to web. But what we also actually found out was that there's a 17% or maybe even 18%, depending if you're rounding up, increase in revenue compared to web. So there's a huge amount of revenue that's still available for anyone to go after. And this by itself is a very, very peculiar but very interesting revenue to look at, because a lot of people, if they don't know how to optimize well enough on AMP, this is what they're missing out on. So let's jump into this bit. So in this area, we're going to introduce Matt, our VP of Product Innovations, and we're going to go through some of the nitty gritty behind on how to actually optimize your AMP setup. And we're going to discuss a few things as well.
Hi, everyone. So as the guys were saying, the big problem that we see all the time, and this is, talking to lots and lots of publishers, is there is always a situation where there is a belief that AMP is generally not making the same sort of amount of money as mobile web. So it's then sort of in some respects sort of downgraded in their thought process. Well, we actually see, as Raj has shown us definite difference. So we see great performing ads, from a programmatic standpoint, also for direct campaigns. We generally see high viewability, high eCPMs. We're never really dealing with these really sort of low, sort of 40, 50 cent eCPMs. Everything is, generally above a couple of dollars globally. And the way that we've seen that is 3 core areas of optimization. One, really digging in and making sure the code is delivered onto the page properly and creating the right volume of and the right quality of the inventory that's being passed over to GAM. Second piece is getting the demand mix right. And the way that AMP runs is it has this ability to have 5 RTC slots. What they're for is connecting additional technologies per ad unit. And we use, generally speaking, we would generally use all of them where possible. This doesn't slow down the page. It's a bit like having 5 header bidding wrappers on the page, but AMP is fully in control of the whole lot and is delivering them at speed and pace. For example, the server-side bidding process, which is very similar to header bidding, is running probably at under half a second to get all of the auctions back, and that could be 10, 20 SSPs, bringing them back onto the page. So getting the demand mix right is important, which in most cases is wrong. Also on the configuration of the code generally is wrong in most cases because it's generally very basic. Maybe wrong is not the right word. Basic is probably a better word. And then the last piece is dynamic floor pricing into GAM. So we do a lot of work where we have a product which deals with dynamic floor pricing on every single ad call, and it then is setting in turn a floor price based on the website, the ad unit, the geo, the device, the day and the hour. So with all of those 3 together, you can see some really, really great results. And the problem that we have is that education piece, which is, well, if you could see AMP performing at full speed and you can see its real eCPMs and its real revenue, would you really choose mobile web over it, knowing that the speed increases that you get from it? I think I'm on to the next slide, and the next slide's mine. So they don't favor AMP anymore. I think Raj has sort of gone through this already. As much as they're not favoring it, they are favoring speed. And this is one of the key things here, right? Is user experience and speed. And the way that AMP runs the whole page is it's really, really controlling everything that's going on. It's lazy loading everything. It's lazy loading all of the ad units. It's really only showing the content when the user needs it and loading it on the fly. And that's a real big difference here. And the way that also that it's built, virtually all web pages. I know there's a stat that Raj is going to get to that's on the bottom of this slide, which is showing, he's going to keep pressing the space bar right now, and getting, there you go, that shows that 60% of AMP domains pass Core Web Vitals. Sadly, that stat is actually probably about 2 years old, right? And I know it's much higher than that now, right? So if we had a better stat, we would have used it. But compared that to normal web pages, mobile web doesn't come close. And, we're talking about a system that is built specifically for this use case, getting in index, delivering really, really great user interaction, and also being able to render specifically fast.
Hey, Whaley, we have a question coming in hot. You ready for one?
Yeah, go for it.
All righty. Can you speak to the RPM and CPM differences between AMP and mobile? Future Publishing and others are moving away from AMP, please.
Yeah, good. Again, I would say, weirdly enough, we have actually spoken to them, is that the problem again is back down to this situation previously, is that most people are making these decisions based off a couple of different things. So they're looking at, back to Raj's point, do I want to manage 2 code bases? Okay. And then secondly is, well, our current, we've been running, say, AMP for 2, 3 years, 4 years, whatever that time period is, and we are seeing lower performance against mobile web. The problem then becomes is that they then make different choices. We have numerous publishers where they are running mobile and AMP looking identical, and AMP is beating mobile web. And we're talking about when they are hands down looking exactly the same. So if the user's navigating from the web page from the homepage of a website onto an article, and they were to be into a web article or an AMP article on the same view, the AMP is outperforming mobile web. Hopefully that answered it.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I most recently came from Penske Media Corporation, and all of their, similar to Futures, all of their publications, Rolling Stone, Variety, are still running AMP. Obviously this is all information I have prior to moving over here, and also wanting to understand Triple 13 and how the change, but pages are cleaner nowadays. Like, lots of people on their own are scaling down, taking out sidebars, making things it kind of aligns with user experience anyways, to have it, be plain versus all the things that could take your user's attention away. So that was another benefit. And I know that on those other properties I just referred to, they had tested with and without, and those are some massive properties, and all chose to stay on the AMP platform.
One thing that a lot of people tend to miss, like e-commerce websites can actually also benefit from AMP as well, and it's not just for publishers. So like this is a really interesting title, because milliseconds do make millions, because there's over, I can't really have the statistics at hand, but there's a lot of websites that actually are using AMP as their code base for their actual e-commerce. So places like Bath and Beyond, Newegg, AliExpress, they're all using this because of the speed benefits and various other things that we just discussed as well. So that's actually quite important. So myth number 5, that's you. Yes, Matt.
Yeah. So can mobile web be faster than AMP? Yeah, it can. Quite simply, it can be. But what I would say, and this is where I think the key driver is, that the difference is, if you have a large-scale development team and you have the resource to maintain one code base and optimize heavily for speed in mobile web, then it probably makes sense to have one code base. If you don't have the luxuries of that, a large resource base to be able to optimize for both, AMP makes a great solution for being fast out the box. And this slide will go through a few different areas, but it's built for this reason. It's built to be fast. It's built to have an amazing user experience. This is what the community was built for, right? So it is a community. It's got a lot of resources behind it. It is particularly fast. And there is an analogy that's going to be on the last slide here, and I've said it about 50 million times, so saying it again always makes me slightly cringe. Is that, if Dom out of Fast and Furious, he doesn't take an SUV and turn it into a high-speed car. He takes something that's faster, makes it faster. That's what I would say. In most scenarios, that makes sense to take AMP, build into it. It's lightning out the box.
Hey, Matt, we have another question coming in from the audience. On our Core Web Vitals report, LCP for AMP pages take longer than 2.5 seconds. Any suggestions on how to improve that? Mobile web version, they are in green.
Can you send me the link and we shall look at that for you?
Yeah, I'm going to drop your email in here so they can email you. Okay, Matt?
Yeah, no problem at all. We'll get one of our guys on it straight away and come back with a very specific answer.
With this, let's jump into, like, what are the ingredients? Like, what are the ingredients like gain traffic, improve your rankings, and like deliver some amazing results? And I'm going to get Lindsay to go through some of these things. And there are 3 key areas that we're going to just discuss. And those are content, speed, and experience, which all in turn will give you the traffic.
Thank you. Yeah, this is a great slide, and this is a topic I'm definitely passionate about, just as how we try to solve for all of these, right? I'm here trying, I've met so many Freestar publishers over the last few months that we're working on traffic growth, right? And one of these that you're looking on the screen is always the problem, right? So when I'm looking at a site, we're trying to increase traffic and solve for, and oftentimes it is speed. You can go to the next slide, but this is great when you're looking at the content. It's more than just the text on the page. And so it's everything you publish, anything you create, including ties into speed and experience, because your user's going to stay on the page longer. You can click through to show anything else on this page, but when you're looking at your content and trying to increase traffic, AMP will pull that same version, obviously, of the content to the user, and you want to look at almost like a content inventory. Understand what you have, what you've covered. Are you, over time with enterprise publishers, you have different editorial teams, you have different writers, creators. Sometimes you've created 3 or 4 different versions of the same angle, the same content. So is there keyword cannibalization happening where you are kind of competing with yourself there? Are you over optimized? And then the piece here is the technical web best practices up to date. Does your content does it show without things blocking it and moving, and especially like the CLS right now with the bounce. So making sure that that doesn't impact the user. And then are you including different assets on the page as well outside of the actual content? This ties into the first area. You could go to the next slide. And then speed. So again, very relevant for this is speed, and Google's looking heavily at it. If AMP solves your speed issue, you can see that it is a very beneficial way to monetize those pages as well. Primarily, someone just spoke to LCP. I believe LCP is a metric less tied to ads specifically on the page or third-party scripts, but more about the content and how that loads. So and then the images, that can take a while. One thing that I've seen work well with large publishers, when you have tons of different stakeholders and you have edit and you have different marketing, you have content, you have all these different things trying to take place on the page, is to get everyone in the room and start a performance budget. And that would be like the maximum things you're going to allow to impact the user. What matters most? Do you need both, 2 email sign up forms? Things like that really impact the speed of the page, right? This is exactly why AMP has that limited version. They won't let you put 15 modules on a page because of the impact it has on speed. So that's a good way to just keep priorities happening on the page versus everything everyone wants. And the last one, let's go to the next slide here, is the experience. So vital. AMP improves the actual experience of the user. And Google's looking at engagement metrics now. These ones listed on the page. How long does the user stay? If you've joined any of my other sessions or read comments or in our Facebook group or Slack channel, you hear me talk a lot about readability. And that is, what's it like when the user gets to the page? How's the font? Is it hard to read? Can you even see the hyperlinks within the paragraphs, right? To get, sometimes they're just like lightly different, like a different shade of font and you can't tell. There's a reason for that. We want people to stay on your pages and continue to scroll on mobile, continue to read your content, love your brand, and see ad impressions, right? That's how we're making revenue. So when you can keep the experience good, which AMP solves for, there's higher engagement metrics on the page. All right. One thing, sorry, lastly, but that was the Google Discover. I've had at Freestar in the last few months, many questions on publishers getting back into Google Discover. It is where on your phone, so it's mobile, on your phone, there is any sort of like Google Chrome, I believe it's a Chrome app, and in there, it'll just give you suggested content right under the search bar. Publishers, you guys can see millions of page views a month from this, but once you get it, it's difficult to get into because it has a lot to do with image sizing, headlines, certain criteria there. AMP solves for that. So that's last. I was going to say AMP, by formatting your pages for that, you automatically at least qualify. Your content still has to be good and interesting enough, but you qualify from a technical perspective to be an AMP. All right. Questions?
There's a question in the chat, Lindsay, that there were allegations that Google intentionally slowed down ad loading when not sold / loaded via their network on AMP sites. Just curious if you had thoughts on this.
I have not heard that. I'll kick it to the others. Let's see.
Yeah, I've not heard that either. Or seen that even.
Never know with Google. Aren't we always questioning them? All right, any other questions?
Again, anyone's allowed to turn on their camera at any time. It's not just us. If you want, oh, we have a question coming in. Should we create content in web stories format? Is that part of the AMP framework?
Yes, you should, and it monetizes particularly well, and it's really easy to sort out.
For Google Web Stories, you're talking, Matt?
Yep. It's actually the way that it does it, it dynamically inserts the ads, and it generally eCPMs particularly well, and it works very nicely. But from it, and publishers we've seen use it have seen good performance. But
this is
Lindsay,
great.
maybe.
This is such a good question. I have yet with Freestar on my, one-on-ones or even anything I've really written so far, talk about Google Web Stories. It's almost one of those things where you wanted to wait it out, right? So let's just say it kind of started hitting with some bloggers maybe a year ago, and you kind of just wait because you can dump a lot of time into something. And the piece that was question, as long as they're monetized, as Matt just said, do it, you're good to go. What I was seeing a lot was like them not monetized and people talking about the success of them via clicks. You guys think of this as like an Instagram story. You click, you tap your screen and you go through different cards and frames. Well, that's great, but unless it's monetized or driving to your webpage at the end of it to monetize, it's wasted effort, right? So when AMP came along to support that framework and publishers are still seeing some traffic, it can be, especially for how-to and really evergreen content, it can be a good strategy. Great question. What else? We're at the 30-minute mark.
Oh.
This was great. This comes up, it's a hot topic. I know I at least talk about it with almost every publisher that I've worked with in the last few months here. If you are trying to solve for speed, ask us more questions. Ask your account manager more questions. These guys are happy to talk more one-on-one about if it's a choice you want to look into and something you want to test. We'd love to go down that path with you.
Yeah, and then just in general, these workshops, I'll just speak, overall about these workshops. First of all, I want to thank all of you for joining. I won't call anyone out, but I see some people are as far as Turkey, and I really appreciate you joining at 7 p.m. your time. So, and the questions are just really, really helpful. That's what we want. We want to address things that matter to you. So thank you for the questions. And for joining. Secondarily, if you're not getting our newsletters, please let us know, but we are sending out a monthly newsletter about these types of topics. We call it kind of our audience development newsletter. And the point is to help you guys grow audience. So if there are any topics, Lindsay recently did one on generally SEO in general. We'll probably do another one since that's such an important one that people just want to hear more about. We did a workshop on image and image sizing. You tell us if there's anything you really want to hear more about. I'm sure other publishers agree with you, and we'll create a workshop. We're doing once a month or more if it comes up. So again, feel free to chime in here or email us on topics you'd like to see more of.
That was so great. Same to all of that. Thank you guys so much for joining. Matt, Raja, this was excellent. We'll talk to you.